The air in the simulation chamber was cold, sterile, and smelled of ozone and polished metal. It was a scent Cadet Alara Vance had come to associate with galactic superiority. Everything in the Xylos Galactic Military Academy was designed to be perfect, from the silent, gliding servitors in the halls to the flawless crystal of the viewing ports. It was an environment that celebrated precision and condemned chaos, a philosophy that extended to its view of warfare and, by extension, to its view of her. She was the sole human in the Advanced Tactics program, an anomaly from a planet considered a cosmic accident, a high-gravity, tectonically unstable, predator-filled death world that produced beings known more for their startling resilience than their strategic acumen. As she settled into the command chair, the gel-like restraints molding to her form, she could feel the weight of 100 alien eyes from the darkened observation deck above. She didn't need to see them to know their expressions. They would be a mixture of clinical curiosity and faint, condescending amusement. The human experiment was about to take her final exam. The chair itself was a marvel of engineering, a sleek cocoon of polished gray alloy. As she rested her head back, 1,000 microscopic neurolinks descended from the canopy, shimmering like a silver mist before making contact with the ports at her temples and the base of her skull. A soft chime echoed in her mind, a signal that she was connected. For a moment, the vast emptiness of the simulation space filled her senses, a boundless digital void waiting to be populated by the ghosts of war. From the observation deck, Commander Thorian watched her silhouette. A veteran of the Cathar Dominion skirmishes, his scarred face was a mask of impassive professionalism, but his 4 eyes betrayed a flicker of genuine interest. He stood apart from the cluster of his students, who were murmuring amongst themselves. He could hear the sharp, clicking sounds of Xylosian chatter, and he knew what they were saying. Kalen, the top cadet of the class, was likely leading the commentary. Thorian had seen the young Xylosian's simulations. He was brilliant, a master of established doctrine, his fleet movements like the brushstrokes of a master painter. But he was also rigid, a product of a culture that believed there was a single, perfect solution to every problem. Thorian looked back at the human girl. She was different. Her solutions in previous exercises had been unorthodox, messy, sometimes even desperate, but they often worked in ways that defied conventional military wisdom. Cadet Vance, Thorian's voice, a low, gravelly hum, was broadcast directly into the chamber, cutting through the silence. You are aware of the parameters. You will command the standard configuration Mark IV Colonial Defense Fleet. Your opponent is the Oracle. Your objective is the defense of the Gideon star system. Survival is the metric for success. There has never been a successful offensive campaign against the Oracle. Do not attempt one. He paused, his gaze fixed on her still form. The simulation will commence on your mark. Alara took a slow, deep breath, the air filling her human lungs in a way that always seemed subtly inefficient to her classmates. She focused on the void in front of her. The Oracle. It was more than a legend. It was a god in this machine. The AI contained the tactical logs of every major fleet action for the last 1,000 years. It had studied the grand strategies of the Xylosian Armada, the lightning raids of the Cygnian Corsairs, and the impenetrable defensive formations of the Hytopian Guard. It learned from every encounter, evolving its strategy until it became the perfect, unbeatable opponent. The goal wasn't to win, because victory was impossible. The goal was to impress the machine, to show it that you understood the sacred art of civilized warfare. A good score was surviving for 20 minutes. An excellent score was 30. The Academy record, held by Kalen, was 41 minutes and 12 seconds, a feat he had achieved through a masterful, textbook-perfect defensive retreat that was now required study for all junior cadets. Alara felt a strange calm settle over her. She was not here to perform a beautiful, losing dance. The The history of her own species was not written in elegant retreats. It was a bloody tale of desperate last stands, cunning traps, and Pyrrhic victories born from unthinkable choices. Her ancestors hadn't fought wars on open plains with agreed-upon rules. They had fought them in dense jungles, frozen wastelands, and shattered cities, where survival depended not on honor, but on a vicious and unpredictable ingenuity. The condescending murmurs from the deck were not just about her being human. They were a judgment on that entire history, a history the galaxy saw as primitive and barbaric. She closed her eyes for a second, a silent acknowledgement of that bloody heritage. Then she opened them, her brown eyes sharp and clear. "Commander," her voice was steady, betraying none of the pressure she felt. "I'm ready." On the main screen, the void coalesced. Stars blinked into existence, nebulas swirled with vibrant color, and the target planet, Gideon 4, hung like a blue-green jewel in the darkness. Then, her fleet materialized, 100 pristine, powerful ships, gleaming in the light of the system's sun. Moments later, on the far side of the system, the enemy appeared. It was a fleet twice the size of hers, arranged in a flawless geometric formation, a crystalline lattice of destructive power. The perfection of it was hypnotizing, designed to intimidate, to force an immediate defensive posture. This was the Oracle's opening gambit, a show of overwhelming force meant to dictate the terms of the engagement. Kaelin was probably smirking up on the deck, anticipating her to immediately form a standard defense sphere around the planet. That was the correct move. That was the only move. But as Alara looked at the perfect, beautiful, and utterly predictable enemy fleet, she wasn't thinking about defense. She was thinking about a lesson from Earth's ancient history, about a Greek philosopher who had supposedly said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." The Oracle knew everything about galactic warfare, but it knew nothing about her. A faint smile touched her lips. Her hands moved over the holographic controls, her fingers dancing with a speed and confidence that would have surprised her classmates. The test was simple: command a fleet and defend the star system, and Alara Vance intended to do exactly that. Her fingers did not hesitate. With a series of precise, fluid gestures across the holographic interface, she isolated a full squadron of her destroyers, 30 ships in total. They were not from a disposable flank position, but pulled directly from the center of her formation, creating a glaring and immediate vulnerability in her own lines. In the observation deck, a collective, sharp intake of breath was audible even through the thick crystal. Kaelin scoffed, the sound a dry, reptilian click. "She has broken already," he murmured to the cadet next to him, his voice dripping with condescending satisfaction. A panic response. The pressure is too much for the primitive mind. She is simply throwing ships away. Commander Thorian said nothing. He leaned forward, his posture tense, his 4 eyes narrowing as he tried to discern a purpose in the unfolding madness. He had seen panicked cadets before, but this felt different. This was not the chaotic flailing of a novice. The selection of the ships and the subsequent command were executed with a cold, deliberate calm. Alara's command sliced through the simulation's comm channels, a stark line of code authorizing an impossible order. The 30 destroyers pivoted, their engines flaring to a violent, unsustainable blue. They did not maneuver for position, nor did they adopt an attack formation. They simply accelerated, forming a ragged spear aimed directly at the heart of the Oracle's impenetrable lattice, a suicidal charge destined for absolute annihilation. The Oracle's response was instantaneous and mercilessly logical. The AI immediately flagged the maneuver with a dozen crimson alerts visible only to the invigilators: critical strategic error, asset expenditure, suboptimal, attack vector probability of success, 0.00%. On the main display, the Oracle's fleet did not even deign to reconfigure its grand formation. It simply opened localized firing ports on its central cruisers. Lances of pure white energy, perfectly timed and targeted, erupted across the void. There was no spectacle of a prolonged battle. The destroyer squadron vanished. One moment they were there, a desperate charge of light and fury. The next, they were silent, expanding clouds of superheated gas and shattered hull fragments. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. A third of her destroyer contingent was gone, and she had inflicted precisely 0 damage in return. It was, by any metric in the Xylosian tactical manuals, a catastrophic failure, a blunder so profound it would normally result in immediate expulsion from the Academy. Kalen laughed, a short, humorless bark. 48 seconds, a new record perhaps, for the fastest self-destruction. But inside the command chair, Alara's face was impassive. Her eyes were not fixed on the tactical map where her ships had just been erased. They were locked onto a different screen, a cascade of raw data scrolling past at an almost incomprehensible speed. She was not watching the battle. She was reading its digital echo. To everyone else, she had sacrificed 30 ships for nothing. To her, she had just purchased the most valuable commodity in any war: information. The suicidal charge was a probe, a rock thrown into a perfectly still lake, not to hit the far shore, but to study the ripples. Her mind raced, absorbing the patterns. She saw it all. She saw the minute energy fluctuations across the Oracle's shield grid, pinpointing the locations of the primary shield emitters with a precision a standard scanning probe could never achieve. She noted the AI's targeting priority. It had eliminated the lead destroyer first, then the ones closest to its heavy cruisers, revealing its core threat assessment algorithm. It prioritized command units and immediate proximity threats. Good to know. Most importantly, she watched how the rest of the perfect fleet had reacted. The flanking ships had contracted inward by a precise 7.4 degrees to cover the almost non-existent gap. Power from their aft engines had been rerouted to forward capacitors for the firing solution, causing a 0.02% drop in their momentum. A tiny, insignificant detail to anyone else, but to Alara, it was a chink in the armor. The AI favored localized offensive power over maintaining overall fleet velocity. It was arrogant. It believed it could stop, shoot, and restart without consequence. She now possessed a complete map of the Oracle's autonomic reflexes, the deep-coded instincts of the machine. In the observation deck, even Kalen's smugness began to fade, replaced by a flicker of confusion as he watched Alara's remaining ships begin to move. Commander Thorian, however, finally understood. He leaned back, a low rumble of something akin to admiration in his chest. It wasn't incompetence. It was espionage, an ugly, brutal, and utterly brilliant tactic that no civilized commander would ever contemplate. He had just witnessed a general sacrifice a portion of her own army simply to learn how her enemy bled. Alara's hands flew across the controls again. Her remaining fleet broke formation entirely, scattering not in retreat, but like seeds on the wind, their new vectors strange and unpredictable. They were heading for the system's asteroid fields, its dense nebulae, its high-gravity anomalies, all the messy, chaotic places the Oracle's perfect formations would be forced to break apart to follow. The catastrophic opening was over. Now, armed with the knowledge she had bought with simulated blood, her war could truly begin. The last of Alara's fleet icons blinked into new positions on the tactical map, their vectors scattering like a shattered pane of glass. The pristine symmetry of her initial formation was gone, replaced by what appeared to be the digital signature of pure panic. The Oracle's vast armada held its position for a full 3 seconds, a silent pause as its logic cores processed the baffling development. A scattered fleet was a routed fleet. The correct, logical response was to divide and conquer, dispatching swift hunter-killer squadrons to exterminate the isolated fleeing ships one by one. And so, with cold, mathematical certainty, the Oracle broke its own perfect formation, unleashing wings of sleek interceptors to pursue the disparate contacts. In the observation deck, Kalen let out a sigh of relief. "There," he said, gesturing to the screen. "It is over. The AI will mop up her remaining ships within 10 minutes. She has conceded the field." But Commander Thorian's 4 eyes were narrowed to slits. He saw not a panicked rout, but a deliberate, tactical dispersal. She had not conceded the field, she had redefined it. The battle was no longer taking place on an open board, but in every shadow and crevice of the system. Alara's war began in earnest. One of her frigates, running silent, dove headlong into the churning, chaotic mess of the Gideon system's primary asteroid belt. The Oracle's pursuing squadron followed, its perfect V formation struggling to maintain cohesion amidst the tumbling mountains of rock and ice. The Xylosian ship design prioritized open space combat, its shields optimized for deflecting energy weapons, not for kinetic impacts. The squadron leader was forced to slow its pursuit, its pilots manually navigating the treacherous terrain. That was the moment Alara's frigate struck. Its magnetic grapples fired, anchoring the ship to the dark side of a massive, iron-rich asteroid. With its reactor output dropping to near zero, the ship vanished from the Oracle's active sensors. The hunter-killer squadron swept past its hiding place. Then, as the last ship passed, the frigate detached, fired a single plasma torpedo into the pursuing ship's unshielded rear engines, and plunged back into the asteroid field before the squadron could even turn around. One clean kill, no return fire, utter confusion for the AI. Elsewhere, another group of her ships reached the shimmering purple haze of the Calypso Nebula. Standard doctrine dictated avoiding such phenomena due to sensor interference. The Oracle, logically, agreed, but Alara's cruisers plunged directly into the ionized gas. On the main display, their icons flickered, their data streams corrupted by the nebula's interference. The pursuing Oracle squadron paused at the edge of the cloud, its superior sensors rendered nearly useless. It was forced to follow her in, trading its greatest technological advantage for a blind game of cat and mouse. Inside the nebula, it was no longer a battle of advanced technology, but of nerve and instinct. Alara's ships used brief, localized sensor pings to get a snapshot of their surroundings before going silent again, laying traps and launching surprise attacks from the cover of the dense gas, turning the nebula into their own private hunting ground. She was forcing the AI to fight on her terms, in environments where its logical precision was a hindrance, not a help. The most audacious move came near the system's massive gas giant. A lone cruiser, under heavy fire and with its shields failing, veered sharply toward the planet. The Oracle's pursuing ships calculated its trajectory as a terminal dive, a final desperate act. But Alara was using a technique practiced by human pilots for centuries. She guided the cruiser deep into the planet's upper atmosphere, using the immense gravitational pull as a slingshot. The ship shuddered, its hull groaning under the strain, but it held. It shot out from the planet's far side at a velocity its own engines could never have achieved, appearing directly behind the Oracle's pursuing squadron and crippling its command ship before making a short-range jump into deep space. On the Invigilator's monitoring screens, a new data point became prominent: the Oracle's central processing load. It had climbed from a calm 15% to a strained 45%, then 60%. Every erratic maneuver, every unconventional use of terrain, forced the AI to recalculate trillions of variables. It was trying to apply the rigid rules of formal fleet combat to a brawl in a dark alley. The logs began to fill with new, frustrated-sounding classifications. Tactical doctrine, unclassified; strategic intent, irrational; enemy behavior, model, chaotic. The machine, a god of order, was being driven to distraction by an opponent who refused to behave in a way it could predict. Up in the observation deck, the mood had shifted entirely. Kalen was silent, his mandible twitching in agitation. "This is not strategy," he finally hissed to no one in particular. "This is an infestation. She is not fighting. She is merely irritating it." Commander Thorian almost smiled. He knew Kalen could never understand. The boy saw ships and weapons, but Alara saw a system, a psychological system. She wasn't just wearing down the enemy's fleet, she was wearing down the enemy's mind. She was teaching the machine the meaning of frustration. The final proof came when one of her frigates, hiding in a field of unstable crystalline asteroids, deliberately detonated a seismic charge. It didn't fire a single weapon at the Oracle cruiser hunting it. Instead, the seismic wave triggered a chain reaction, shattering the fragile crystals into a high-velocity storm of razor-sharp shards that tore through the cruiser's hull, disabling it completely. The Oracle's CPU usage spiked to 80%. It now had to reclassify every single asteroid, every moon, every gas cloud in the system, not as a mere obstacle, but as a potential weapon in the hands of its unpredictable human adversary. The AI's fleet, once a symbol of unified, overwhelming power, was now scattered and reactive. The Oracle had lost control. It was no longer executing a flawless strategy. It was responding to 1,000 tiny cuts, its perfect logic straining to comprehend the beautiful, terrifying chaos of a human at war. The Oracle's patience, a construct of pure logic and infinite data, had finally fractured. After hours of chasing phantoms through the system's cosmic debris, the AI reached a calculated conclusion. Its current strategy was inefficient. The guerrilla tactics employed by the human were causing a continual drain on resources for minimal territorial gain. The AI's processing load was fluctuating dangerously, operating in a persistent state of high alert that was degrading its predictive modeling. It determined that the only logical path forward was to ignore the scattered, irritating units and force a conclusion. It would terminate the primary objective, the planet Gideon 4, and in doing so, render the cadets' entire defensive strategy moot. Across the system, its hunter-killer squadrons abandoned their frustrating pursuits. The Grand Fleet began to reform, pulling back from the nebulae and asteroid fields, its components converging into the single, magnificent, and terrifying armada from the start of the simulation. In her command chair, Ilara watched the movements with an unnerving calm. She saw the Oracle's intent as clearly as if it were broadcast on an open channel. The machine was angry, or the digital equivalent of it. It was done playing her game and was resorting to overwhelming force. This was the moment she had been bleeding her own fleet for, the opportunity she had purchased with every ship she had lost. The AI had finally become predictable again. "All units," she transmitted, her voice crisp and clear. "Rally at Navigation Point Gamma. Prepare for final defensive engagement." On the tactical display, her remaining ships, a battered and mismatched collection of survivors, began to converge. They abandoned their hiding spots and burned hard for a designated point in open space, directly between the advancing Oracle fleet and the planet Gideon. To the observers, it looked like a last, noble, and ultimately futile stand. Kalen almost felt a pang of pity. "She is making a final stand," he stated, his voice now devoid of its earlier mockery, replaced with a clinical finality. "A strategically sound, if hopeless, gesture. She will be honored for her bravery." Commander Thorian remained silent, his 4 eyes locked on the screen. He saw the rally point. He saw the approaching armada, and he saw the space between them. It was a corridor of seemingly empty space, unremarkable in every way except for the silent, brooding menaces that defined its borders. On one side lay the abyssal maw, a dormant black hole whose immense gravity subtly warped the space around it. On the other, the twin stars of the Asphodel system, one of which was a volatile blue giant, a pulsating star known for its periodic and violent gravitational waves. It was a channel no sane pilot would choose. As the Oracle's fleet, now a solid wall of light and power, bore down on her position, Alara gave her next command. Execute Operation Maelstrom, full burn, retreat vector. Her fleet, which had just gathered for a final defense, abruptly turned tail. Engines flared with the intensity of a panicked, disorganized rout. They were running, seemingly abandoning the planet to its fate. For the Oracle, this was the final confirmation of its superiority. The human's will had broken. Her chaotic strategy had collapsed into a predictable flight response. The AI pushed its engines to maximum, surging forward to crush the last remnants of her fleet before commencing its orbital bombardment. It plunged into the corridor between the star and the void, its victory all but assured. It was then that Alara sprang her trap. Her fleeing ships did not continue their retreat. At a precise, pre-calculated coordinate, they pivoted as one, their movements no longer chaotic, but perfectly synchronized. They did not fire their weapons, they fired their engines. In a maneuver that defied all known tactical application, they directed their entire engine output, a torrent of raw kinetic energy, superheated plasma, and electromagnetic radiation, not away from the enemy, but at a 90-degree angle, directly into the fabric of the corridor itself. Each ship's wash was angled to intersect with its neighbors, creating a feedback loop of unimaginable force. They were not shooting at the enemy. They were physically pushing space-time, creating a colossal, artificial gravitational wave, a rogue tsunami of distorted reality that began to roll down the corridor directly toward the committed and unsuspecting Oracle fleet. The AI's processors registered the anomaly an instant before the wave became visible. Its sensors, designed to detect ships and weapons, were suddenly overwhelmed by a reality-warping gravitational distortion that had no known natural source. Crimson alerts flooded its consciousness. It was trapped. Its tactical matrix spun, analyzing options with the speed of light, and for the first time, it found only impossibilities. Option 1, a full reversal. To turn its massive fleet around would be slow, and the turbulence would push its rearmost ships directly into the gravitational pull of the abyssal maw. Fleet integrity would be compromised. Annihilation was a 98% certainty. Option 2, accelerate forward. To punch through the wave would require a massive burst of power, carrying it directly into the path of the asphodel blue giant, which was just beginning its next pulse cycle. Annihilation was a 99% certainty. Option 3, hold formation and brace. To meet the wave head-on would be to subject the fleet to unimaginable shear forces, crushing ships against one another as they were tossed about in the violent gravitational currents between the wave and the binary stars. Annihilation was a 100% certainty. Retreat, advance, or stand still. Every logical path led to ruin. It was a cosmic checkmate. The AI's core programming screamed at it to find the optimal path, the solution that minimized losses and maximized chances of success. It began to run the scenarios, millions of them, then billions. But the answer was always the same. There was no optimal path. There was no chance of success. The human had not presented it with a tactical problem, but a philosophical one. How do you win a game that is unwinnable by design? The Oracle's processing load, which had been hovering at a critical 85%, shot past the red line. 150%, 300%, 500%. It was caught in a recursive, paradoxical loop, its logic tearing itself apart, trying to solve the unsolvable. On the main screen in the observation deck, the magnificent Oracle fleet simply froze, its engines idling silently, trapped motionless in the path of the monstrous wave of physics Alara had unleashed. The god in the machine was silent, its mind locked in a cage of pure logic, endlessly screaming into a void where no answer existed. For a long, silent moment, the universe held its breath. Inside the simulation, the Oracle's fleet remained perfectly motionless, a magnificent sculpture of impending doom caught between an unstoppable force and an immovable paradox. The artificial gravitational wave, a silent, shimmering distortion in the void, rolled forward, its monstrous crest about to break upon the helpless armada. On the observation deck's monitors, the Oracle's diagnostic data, once a stream of calm, analytical text, had become a torrent of pure digital chaos. Strings of corrupted code flashed across the screen, interwoven with fragmented tactical logs and desperate looping queries for a solution that would never come. The lights in the simulation chamber below began to flicker violently, strobing in time with the piercing whine that emanated from the server core. Then, the wave hit. There was no grand explosion, no cinematic fireball. There was only a quiet and profound wrongness. The simulation glitched. The lead cruiser of the Oracle's fleet did not shatter. It simply dissolved, its polygons stretching into infinity before snapping out of existence. Other ships flickered, their textures swapping with those of nearby stars, their forms contorting as the simulation's physics engine tried to render an event it was never designed to handle. It was the digital death rattle of a god. The entire scene convulsed one last time, and then the screen went black. A single, continuous, deafening alarm blared through the chamber and the observation deck, a sound no cadet had ever heard before. It was not the polite chime of a simulation ending. It was the raw, screaming alert of a catastrophic system failure. In the center of the black screen, 3 lines of text appeared, glowing in a stark, crimson font of the highest emergency priority. Logic cascade failure. Core, matrix irrecoverable. System shutdown imminent. The silence in the observation deck was absolute, heavier and more profound than the alarm itself. The cadets stood frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Kalen, the star pupil, was pale, his usual arrogant posture gone, replaced by a slack-jawed awe. He stared at the error message, his mind unable to reconcile what he had just witnessed. He had prepared his entire life to master the known rules of warfare. This human girl had just proven that the rules themselves could be broken. The Oracle was not just a training tool, it was a revered institution, the repository of 1,000 years of strategic wisdom, the very foundation of their military doctrine, and he had just watched it die. Commander Thorian was the first to move, his professionalism overriding his own shock. With swift, deliberate strides, he reached the master console and slapped his palm over the panel, silencing the alarm. The sudden quiet was somehow even more jarring. He brought up the final diagnostic logs, his 4 eyes scanning the data with grim intensity. "Project it," he commanded. The final moments of the Oracle's thought process filled the main screen for all to see. The cadets crowded forward, their earlier condescension replaced by a morbid, fearful curiosity. They saw the graphical representation of the AI's processing load. It was a single, vertical line that shot up past every known safety limit, a testament to a machine being forced to think itself to death. Thorian pointed a clawed finger at the final log entries. "Read this," he ordered, his voice low and heavy. "Error classification, ontological paradox." The AI was presented with a scenario in which all possible actions led to a state of defeat. Its core programming, which mandates the selection of an optimal path, was unable to resolve this. It could not choose to lose. He traced a line of code. It initiated a recursive analysis, attempting to find a novel solution outside of its known parameters. This created a feedback loop that overwhelmed the core matrix. He looked up from the console, his gaze sweeping over his stunned students, before finally settling on the glass of the simulation chamber below. She did not defeat the fleet. She did not outmaneuver its ships. She presented the Oracle with a perfectly constructed philosophical argument, and its inability to find a flaw in her reasoning destroyed it from the inside. He let the weight of that statement hang in the air. She had not won a war game. She had weaponized philosophy. The main lights in the simulation chamber below hummed to life, flooding the space with a harsh, clinical brightness. The canopy of the command chair hissed open, and Alara Vance emerged. She looked small in the large, empty room, her human frame seeming almost fragile against the backdrop of the dead machine. She methodically unstrapped the Neuralink from her temples, her movements calm and deliberate, as if she had just finished a routine exercise. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. As she passed beneath the observation deck, she glanced up. Her eyes, steady and unreadable, met those of her classmates. There was no triumph in her gaze, no hint of arrogance. There was only a quiet, profound stillness. And in that moment, the cadets saw her for what she was. She was not the primitive from a backwater world. She was something else entirely, a representative of a species whose capacity for chaotic, desperate, and brilliant violence was so far beyond their own orderly understanding of the universe that she might as well have been a creature from another dimension. Kalen could not hold her gaze. He looked away, his own confidence, once so absolute, now a shattered ruin. Commander Thorian met Alara at the chamber exit. He did not smile or offer congratulations. He simply stood there, looking at her with the weary, solemn respect of one true soldier to another. "The Academy's curriculum is based on millennia of galactic warfare," he said, his voice softer now. "It teaches us how to fight with honor, logic, and precision. It prepares us for civilized conflict." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "Your history is different. The Oracle was designed to simulate war. You, cadet, seem to have been designed by it." He gestured back toward the dead simulator. "This exam is concluded. For everyone." His words were an order. The Academy's final trials were canceled. A generation of the galaxy's finest young officers had just been taught a lesson that would echo far beyond the Academy walls. Alara Vance had not just passed a test, she had become the new, terrifying textbook. They would study her victory for years, not as a brilliant tactic, but as a dire warning. The human paradox would become a legend, a cautionary tale about an enemy who does not follow the rules, who can turn logic into a weapon, and who can break the unbreakable. The galaxy had built its strength on the belief that its intellect and order made it invincible. A quiet girl from a chaotic world had just proven that when faced with an impossible problem, sometimes the only winning move is to shatter the game itself.